Hello, Leeds Gate report to Lankelly about the asset-based community development project. So first of all, me and Ellen Teresa are just going to go over a little bit of a recap about what we've done. I think you know that we've got a timeline in the office where we are mapping some of our learning and also some of the projects that we're doing around ABCD. We just started with asset-based community development, and we defined it. We defined it as building a community from its strengths and not its weaknesses, starting with positives, what Gypsy and Traveller people are good at. And we did a lot of mapping of these kind of things. In some of the workshops that we ran, discussions around power resulted in people writing to their local MPs over issues close to their heart, and also joining a wider campaign from Traveller movement called Operation Traveller Vote.
The Headspace course was to help people manage stress. Some of them with stress or with depression would write down their feelings, what's making them depressed, what they've done today, what's their daily routine.
I think the fun days last year were a really good example of where community members took a lead and did various things to contribute to different days that we had around the city, such as running the barbecue, doing the face painting, helping with the children's activities.
My elderly lives on the site with us, but obviously my elderly has dementia. The people on the site understands his illness, and they understand that if he goes near the road, that they'll bring him back in. We produced this dementia report with Irish and Britain.
The sewing group has gone from strength to strength, with members playing a big part in its running, and we've also secured additional funding for tutors and equipment. So that was just a brief recap of where we've been going with the project, and I think now it's really important in terms of a report back to Lankelly Chase is where we think we're going with the project, and a little bit of reflection and some almost theoretical discussion, I suppose, around definitions of words, and as a staff team capturing some of the discussions that we've had.
By the midway of our Lankelly Chase funded ABCD project, we'd learned what seems to be quite a significant difference between ABCD at Gate and what we understand about the starting point and the methodology of ABCD projects that we've heard of elsewhere. Our impression of the starting point and methodology of ABCD projects we've heard about is from a perspective of something within communities being broken or needing strengthening. For example, where neighbours don't appear to have intimate, supportive relationships with fellow community members, it leaves them potentially isolated and relying on public services for basic support needs. ABCD can be proposed as a way of combating fractured communities or relationships within communities, rather than a way of combating fracture between communities or between communities and society, and with the aim, whether it's stated or not, of reducing demand on public services. What we've learned about Gypsy and Traveller communities from our ABCD mapping exercises is that Gypsy and Traveller communities are not broken. In other words, for most people, they have strong relationships within their communities, they enjoy good mutual understanding and support, they're resilient and either self-reliant or community-reliant for their support needs. We've learned this is called bonded social capital. What Gypsy and Traveller people do not have, perhaps unlike mainstream communities, is bridging social capital. This means the type of relationships and means needed to access public assets in an equitable fashion to people from other communities. This is beautifully summed up by our first asset map, which shows that some of the roads and bridges that other people enjoy are, for Gypsy Traveller people, weak or broken. This learning challenges our initial assumptions about the sort of bonding activities we imagined might be part of this project and that we see with other ABCD projects. Gypsy and Traveller people don't need our help in developing bonded social capital, thank you very much. So we're focusing very much now on our relationships between our communities and others, i.e. the roads and bridges that you see on this map. Another thing to consider, though, is that being in a community with weak bridging social capital and strong bonded social capital isn't always a good thing for everybody. It relies on a strong shared identity and ties of family and culture. Some people can become isolated in strongly bonded communities if aspects of their identity or their experiences are outside of what's understood or acceptable within the community. So, just as an example, a person experiencing domestic violence in a community which identifies as having an absolute commitment to marriage for life might find it difficult to access bridges which help them to leave a violent marriage. This would seem to suggest that the healthiest communities have both strong social bonds and strong accessible bridges to assets outside of their own community.
Okay, so we've developed some shared language through our asset-based community development project to try and describe the bridging social capital that we want to try and encourage. So our mapping exercises have helped us to come up with 3 different concepts, and those 3 different concepts are roads, bridges and tunnels. So we found that there are roads out that Gypsy Traveller people use all the time, and these are roads that get people effectively to the place that they want to go to, and they're free of obstruction, these roads. So we identified that some of the roads that Gypsy Traveller people have out are roads to church, roads to social life, roads to Leeds Gate, roads to people in other communities who are their friends and their allies. But we found that in certain situations these roads are closed and there's an obstruction in these roads, meaning people can't get to their destination. So for example, we talked about the road to school being one of these, and I think you might be able to see that on the map behind me. So we found that there were 2 ways to get around this obstruction, and one of these ways is through building a bridge. So a bridge is a route to accessing something which is open and it is visible to all. Everyone can see the bridge and anyone can walk across the bridge, so it can be accessed by anyone. The bridges involve investment in order to build them. They involve working together and they find a solution to an obstruction. But a bridge isn't necessarily system change, because the existence of a bridge doesn't necessarily oblige the mainstream system or service to change. It just makes a bolt-on to mean that some people can get across the bridge and access that service. And the bridge can sometimes even make it easier for the mainstream service to stay the same, because it's allowing another route in for people. And we thought a bit about the way Travellers' education services have been set up and worked out in thinking about bridges. Yeah, they're a really necessary bridge, which has meant that Gypsy Traveller children have access to school, but they haven't necessarily resolved the problem, created system change, which is the acceptance of Gypsy Traveller children and their culture in education settings. But one thing that's really key about these bridges is that they are visible, they're in public, and they acknowledge that there is an obstruction in the road. So the other way round an obstruction is a tunnel. And a tunnel is often a route that's navigated by individuals or groups of individuals or by an individual worker within a service as a way of getting around a problem. The tunnel isn't visible to everybody and it can have its disadvantages. It can mean an arduous journey and it doesn't always meet people's needs. So we found that Gypsy and Traveller people had been making tunnels for generations and through making these tunnels finding solutions to some of the barriers that they face. But what a tunnel means is the problem remains invisible to most people. You're finding an invisible solution. And we've reflected that sometimes in building the foundations to build a bridge, you can undermine the tunnel and cause the tunnel itself to collapse. So shining a light on a problem and a situation can mean that the solutions people have developed themselves, sometimes over generations, are actually destroyed in you trying to find a public and open solution, which is the bridge.
So another good example we've got of tunnels and bridges is with members using GP registration and using care of addresses of either friends or perhaps Gate. The tunnel that they're building is they're trying to bypass the problem is that they can't actually register at the nearest practice, or indeed any practice sometime, where they're actually living the address that they've got. So the issue is that, you know, if that address isn't actually yours, and you're perhaps not reliably getting letters about immunisations, appointments, things like that, you're also not actually getting a service directly through that tunnel, because the surgery isn't actually openly taking you on formally from where you're actually living. So the bridge that we've been trying to build is that you're going to your GP, and we're trying to encourage them or challenge them to take someone on from where they're living, whether that be roadside or on site. And we're doing that through using the other GP practices to encourage other services and other surgeries to take a more constructive approach, and perhaps often using a more challenging approach of stress and guidance, which is out there, that bridge should be built, that people should be able to register from where they are. I think we then recognise, though, that when we're building that bridge, the tunnel is being eroded, it's being damaged. People are having to be clear and formal about where they're actually living, which is undermining the tunnel, which was using some sort of alternative care of address. So it is undermining that tunnel, but it's in the hope that you can build a better bridge, which is someone being able to register where they actually live, which is much more sustainable, much more equitable than the tunnel we had in the first place.
Okay, so we're here to talk about co-production, Ellie. What is co-production? What do we think co-production is?
I don't think we entirely know yet. I think we're having a bit of a debate about how we use the word co-production and how other people use it, and what value we want to attach to the word. I think it's used a lot in discourse in the voluntary sector at the moment, and there seem to be lots of different definitions of co-production as a result of that.
Do you think there are lots of different definitions, or do you think everybody just assumes, because it's really simple words, means done together and production means produce something, so nobody bothers actually explaining what they mean?
Yeah, I think there's an element of that, definitely. I think something that we've been thinking about quite a lot is actually, well, this isn't necessarily going to be the same process every time with a particular outcome that you could define, but something that you could define about co-production might be the principles or values that you have to go into a co-production kind of scenario. And I think thinking at Leeds Gable, we've got our own set of values as an organisation, and do our values as an organisation lend themselves to co-production?
So what we're saying is we don't necessarily think there is an agreed definition of co-production, or at least one, there isn't a definition that's widely discussed or understood. So we're working to define it ourselves and then decide, right, is co-production what we're doing, or is any of the activities that we're working with services and involving our members in, are any of those actually co-production, or are they something else?
Yes, yeah, and I think there is a danger in attaching ourselves too much to a word like co-production, because we've been talking with Jo, haven't we, about this idea of the empty signifier, so a word that almost like is hollowed out and loses its meaning through being used too many different times without a good description being attached to it in too many different situations. And if we think about co-production as a set of values that you need to have in order to do co-production, I can see why you wouldn't want to put a snappy sentence on it, because it's not going to be the same in different situations. But within that becomes the danger for somebody to corrupt that word and make it into something that isn't useful for us. And you know, I'm already seeing that in emails all over the voluntary sector in Leeds at the moment, which, you know, willy-nilly use the word co-production. And we saw it with asset-based stuff as well. Do you remember when there was that asset-based consultation going on, and we were like, well, how is that?
Because it wasn't asset-based at all, it was just a usual consultation. So these words are being hung onto, they're new words that are being hung on to old, perhaps not very effective ways of producing services that work for people. My understanding of the point of co-production, at least as it's put forward by other people, is that it should lead to services that are better for people. often I think actually what the service is looking for is cheap or reducing cost, not necessarily being more effective.
And I think that's why we have to focus on like what these values or behaviours are that we want around co-production, because I think if you are enacting those, the values and behaviours that I think you need to do in order to do co-production, then you know that should come out. A services motivation should come out and be challenged within that dynamic. And I think some of the things that we've talked about quite a lot is like how I think for us, we think if you're going to be in a situation of co-production, then there definitely needs a really honest conversation about people's standpoint. So, you know, where are you coming from, and acknowledging people's power within a situation as well, and levelling out of that power and acknowledging it, and then a levelling out to say everybody here is equal, but not everyone's the same, because everyone won't be the same. Everyone's coming from their own particular standpoint.